Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Festival of Enterprise COVID-19 webinar series. I'm David Stevenson, your host, and I'm joined this morning by David Acland. Good morning, David.
Hi, morning.
David is the technical director at Moof IT, and this morning he will be taking us through a presentation on IT security threats for SMEs, a subject that I think is perhaps not overlooked sometimes by SMEs, but a very important one. So I think it'll be a very important, interesting presentation this morning. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this morning, and with that, I will hand it over to David. David, lovely to have you on.
Cool, thanks very much. Okay, so I'll get started the presentation. Okay. So, as just introduced, so my name's David Acland and work at a company called Moof IT. I've been working in the IT field for just coming up to 20 years now, and the last couple of years getting slightly more focused on IT security and helping out our clients with IT security related issues. And just to talk about Moof IT just for a second, so we're an Apple-focused IT services company. We've been running for sort of heading towards 2.5 years now, and we support over 150 clients, a mix of SMEs where we provide all IT services, and larger sort of global enterprises where we provide consulting services on Apple technologies and so on. So just to get into the content, so this is talking about real-world IT security threats, and it mostly works by example. So we've got a couple of recent issues that have come up, or certainly in the last year or so. I'm just going to walk you through kind of loosely what happened, but also how they could have been prevented. Obviously, first of all, it's worth just touching on the why, because we hear things like this. Sometimes we hear companies believe they're not really going to be a target. To be honest, anyone that has a registered company or has any money in their bank account will be a target. The attackers are typically going for relatively small amounts of money. They don't get too greedy. They're quite clever with the amounts. So I definitely don't think that you're not going to be a target. And with regards to harm, sometimes it's a data breach where it's reputational damage, but quite commonly we see tens of thousands of pounds being taken, sometimes upwards of 40, 50,000 pounds, which is enough to cause harm. A lot of you may survive it, but it's definitely damaging. And then we sometimes hear people say that implementing security is quite expensive to do. Some of the points in this presentation are free to implement. So there may be more expensive tools out there, but there's loads that you can do for free, and you should be doing for free. So with that, I'll get into some of the examples. And the first one is basically summarized as kind of theft by deception, or where they've impersonated someone. So in this case, a company was looking to make a purchase of a product, and they were discussing with the vendor via email, and they went back and forth, lots of discussions. They got to the point of talking about price and making the payment, and at that point the attacker intervened and basically replied to the thread with different bank details. The thread was incredibly convincing. It mimicked it exactly. So the payment was made, but the payment was made to the wrong person. So they only found out, a day later when the vendor chased up and said, "When will you be making the payment?" So a couple of key points with this one. First of all, your emails can be read by anyone. There are some ways that you can protect it, and there's certain scenarios where they're encrypted, but for the most part, if you send an email to someone else, that person can read it, and so can anyone else on the internet. And so it's an incredibly insecure way of communicating. So just bear that in mind. The email address, because the attacker doesn't have the email address of the vendor, they'll have a slightly different one, but most people don't notice that kind of subtle change. And the attacker clearly put in a lot of effort. They spent time watching the email conversation, going back and forth, waited for the exact right moment to strike. So this wasn't just a casual, phishing email. This was a real targeted attack. Indicators are quite small, but the email domain would have changed. Something else that sometimes get overlooked, and this isn't a given, but quite often the tone of the email will change. The attackers basically want to get the money and get out quickly, and they become quite blunt, almost rude at that point. So that's if you're having a conversation with someone and suddenly the tone of the email changes, that's kind of a warning sign. And things you can do about it. First of all, don't make a payment to someone. It seems silly, but don't make a payment to someone until you've authenticated their bank details. And I'll talk about what I mean by that in a second. But also, don't trust payment details or really any details someone sends you via email. They should be distrusted until proven legitimate. What I mean by authenticating, if it was a payment and you were discussing via email, once you're at that point of making a payment, go on the company's website, give them a call their main office number, ask to be put through to their accounts department, and just verify the bank details. The rest of the conversation was relatively low risk, but at the point of payment, the risk goes up massively. And this is something you should do with any kind of emails. If you've got something that's kind of relatively low risk, then you don't need to put loads of effort into authenticating every single email you get. But as the risk goes up, you'll want to make sure that you're applying the right level of authentication and confirming that the person you're sending money to is definitely the right person. Same as if you're going to be sending HR information to your payroll company, for example. You want to make really sure that the person you're sending that to is actually the payroll company and not someone else. Okay, second example is just an email account compromise. This one is slightly different. So where in the previous example, the attacker just impersonated someone, they sort of mimicked it. In this case, someone's email account was actually compromised. So the attacker got their password and could log in to their email account. So the employee's email account was compromised. They had a good look through. Obviously, they've got full access to their email. So they read previously sent emails, looked at how they sign off emails. And they, towards the end of the month, they sent an email to the payroll team saying, hey, I've changed bank. Could you just pay my salary into this bank account instead? They did that. The employee's salary was paid into the attacker's bank account. And a few days after payday, the employee then asks when they're going to get paid, which that's obviously that moment when you get a little sick feeling in your stomach. So this one's even worse because indicator-wise, the only thing you could really see is on the email system, and this is something we do for some customers where we're watching for suspicious sign-in activity, people signing in from more than one place at a time, or just odd activity on the email sign-ins. To the payroll company, there'll be no indication that there's something wrong. It's come from the right email address. The tone of the email is correct. It's even got the same sign off that that employee would normally put. So what can you do about it? First of all, use multi-factor authentication on your email accounts. This is like number one, and it's kind of considered nowadays, if you're not doing this, it's bordering on kind of negligent behavior. But also don't rely on email as a form of authentication if it's a high-risk action. So this is the same thing from the previous example. When a payroll company is receiving an instruction to change the bank details of where the employee's salary goes, they should not have just taken an email as proof that that's legitimate. It doesn't matter how good the email looks or whether it's come from the right email address. That's just not emails aren't encrypted, can be read by anyone, and so they should have checked for additional confirmation, just call the employee. Really the easiest thing. The second part, so use multi-factor authentication, but also make sure your passwords are strong. There's a few reasons why this employee's password might have been compromised. First of all, the password's too weak, and things you should do with passwords, they should be 10 characters or more. You should mix uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, and chuck in a special character. You shouldn't reuse your passwords. There's been loads of high-profile hacks from companies like Dropbox and Google and other companies where their password databases get compromised. So if you use the same password for lots of different systems, that means your password might just be available on the internet for people to buy. And use a password manager, something like LastPass or 1Password really help, or even just a built-in like macOS keychain or password managers in Windows to randomly generate passwords for different things. As an example, and it's just an example case, we use a password manager at Moof, and our passwords typically look like that. Completely random, 64 characters, unguessable, and unique to that one particular service that it's being used for. And if you don't want to use a password manager, there's a recommendation to use like random words mixed together. If you are going to do that, just try and mix it up a bit more. So instead of just having the words, add in some capital letters, add in some numbers. And if you want to make it even less predictable, rather than replacing characters, actually add them into the words. So rather than it being like a dictionary word, these are now completely random, but still memorable. And use MFA was the other point. Okay, last example. So this one, very different. This one was a server setup. So server setup with remote access enabled. It was configured to allow remote access from the internet. And this is something a lot of companies with COVID-19 are doing at the moment because employees are working from home. Their servers may have been in-house before, and now they're making them externally accessible. So in this particular case, the protocol that they were sharing across the internet wasn't designed to be internet facing and had known vulnerabilities that were then attacked. And the attacker gained access and crypto locked all of the company data. So just to put this in, this is a slightly harder one to understand, but just to put it in context. So you've got a server that looks like that, or maybe like that. And you have your firewall and your company, and then you've got your users inside, and they're all happy and working. And then you get the hacker come along, and when they try and access it, they're blocked because of the firewall. So what happened here was they basically they wanted people to access it externally, so they just put the server outside. And you can probably visually see the problem with that. So when you have a server, quite often they're not designed to be internet facing, and they're not safe to be internet facing. The attackers will just scan all IP addresses on the internet and target any that respond, particularly if they have a vulnerability. So in the simplest case, just put the server behind a VPN service to protect it. But in this case, the front door was left unlocked, pretty much. Okay, so protecting against this, if you do host your own server and want to publish it on the internet or make it available on the internet to your users, make sure you're minimizing the exposure and you don't just remove the firewall or bypass the firewall. Make sure that service is actually secure enough to be on the internet. And if you're not sure, then have an independent company do penetration tests or some kind of security testing on that server to make sure that it's secure enough. Oh, last one. Obviously, with crypto locking, we don't recommend paying, really. I mean, it could be an option, but your best thing, if you get a crypto lock attack, just restore from backup. But you need to make sure you have really, really good backups to be able to survive that. Okay, so they were just a couple of examples, obviously pretty quick run through. The last thing I just wanted to mention, something alluded to in the topic description, as your company does grow, and you may have already had this, you get some enterprise clients. You start to attract larger enterprise clients. And what happens when they start to engage with you, they will often send you a questionnaire. So they want to know that you are definitely secure before they will start doing work with you. This is something we see a lot of our clients as they grow. They attract a certain client, and then all of a sudden they send us a questionnaire saying, please help. So we spent the last few years kind of trying to get ahead of it. But the client wants to know what your security policy is. They'll usually send you an extensive questionnaire. We've seen some up to 120 questions or more. Basically what they're looking for, they say anyone can get hacked, but they just want to make sure that you are doing all of the basic sensible things. So a couple of examples here, just to wrap up. So they expect you to have a security policy of some kind. So they kind of want to see that you have thought about it and implemented some sensible measures. Processes in place to handle events if they do happen. And then some basic things. So if you have an office internet connection, you should have a firewall protecting it. You should have antivirus software on your computers. You should have disk encryption. Disk encryption is free on Windows and Mac, and you should be using it. Ideally, you'll have a password policy, so you won't have all your employees using the same password or a weak password or one that's derived from your company name, but a decent password policy. And you'll be using multi-factor authentication everywhere it's available. And then lastly, you will have a decent inventory of your users, your computers, and the different systems you're using, so that you've got a handle on, where is your data, who's accessing it, and things like that. So that last point was just something to help you kind of get ahead of it. So when you get one of these clients asking you and sending you a big questionnaire, you're kind of more prepared for it. And with that, that's it from me.
Wonderful, David. Thank you. I think everyone's hearts are probably beating a little bit faster by now. It's always a semi-nerve-wracking topic, obviously, because it's so complex and the hackers are so sophisticated and getting more so by the day. Some of these obviously ransomware attacks and that big attack happened. I suppose it was 18 months ago now, when it was companies all over the world. I can't remember what that virus was or hack was.
Yeah, and that was basically unpatched servers. So there's a vulnerability. Microsoft fixed it. Yeah, but some companies their system, they were too slow. They didn't run the updates. So yeah, something I didn't actually note in the presentation, but always run software update.
Always run software updates.
The number one protection.
Back things up regularly to locations that disks that people can't access, and think about this, because if you aren't prepared for it when it does happen, it's almost impossible to recover from. Or could theoretically, if you are prepared.
You can't build a backup afterwards.
No, exactly. Well, I think hopefully that will make people think about this, not about the fear, but it is an important topic for SMEs, and I know one that isn't often addressed, which is understandable as people grow. They may not be thinking that this is a top priority, but getting these systems in place while you are growing is incredibly important. There's a question here from Henry, wondering what you mean by your emails can be read by anyone.
So basically they're sent. There's something called clear text, which is basically means unencrypted. So what you put in the email is simply transmitted over the internet. The protocols that email use are very old. They're 30 or so years old now, and they didn't have encryption applied to them. So when you send an email, it can be read by, there's tools you can scan and pick up packets of information going around the internet. The internet's a public place, so they can be read. There is levels of encryption you can apply, and there's certain bits of the traffic that are encrypted, but there's bits that aren't. And in that one of those examples, that's what the attackers have exploited. They're just reading the conversation back and forth.
Okay. So worth keeping in mind, email is not a secure form of communication in any way.
Definitely not.
And something that people often don't understand about that form of communication. It's, as you say, running on a...
And it depends on the data you're sending, but that risk versus authentication. chart that I put up. Like if you're going to send someone a password, don't send that via email. But if you're going to send someone just a normal email, that's what it's designed for. But just don't send sensitive or high risk things over email.
Sure. That makes a great deal of sense. Thank you. And we've got another question here from Annette asking, how does disk encryption work on a Mac or PC?
So they built it into the OS. So all it does is basically scramble all of the data on the drive. So when you power on the machine, it asks you to enter your password, which is your normal logon password, and then it unencrypts the disk. And what it means is if you lose it or it gets stolen, someone can't get access to the data. They could wipe the computer and reuse it, but it's just a bit of tin at that point. It's not all of your data with your passwords and everything in it. So on a Mac, you turn it on in System Preferences, and there's a feature called File Vault that you enable. And on Windows, there's a BitLocker feature again. It's built into the OS. It's free. You just switch it on.
Great. Thanks for that. We have a question here from someone asking, let me just see if we can get a name here. Alex, who is wondering whether WhatsApp is actually encrypted text and how safe are WhatsApp communications? Is that a safer method?
Yeah. Well, so sort of. I think if you have a large enterprise client, they won't like using WhatsApp to send sensitive information. Interestingly, it's probably more secure than email because it's encrypted end to end, which is good. That's because it's a modern system. The problem is you're not completely in control of the encryption. You're trusting a third party you don't have control over, and so there is an element of risk there. And obviously, the company behind that is known for they like people's data, so you have to be slightly cautious there. It's okay. I mean, sometimes just sending, if you're going to send sensitive information, like if I was going to send someone some login details, I'll break it into two pieces and send two pieces two different ways. That way, if an attacker gets one piece and I text them the other piece, then without the other piece of information, it's out of context and useless to an attacker. WhatsApp, it's encrypted, but I'd use it slightly with caution.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that sort of follows on, Annette's follow-up question follows on really from what you were speaking to there, asking how could send sensitive information. What is what should be the protocol for a business?
Yeah, there's a few different things. So you can encrypt files on Macs and PCs. So if you say got a spreadsheet with some sensitive information inside it, you can encrypt the file, then send that over email. Because if an attacker gets it, they can see the email that says "please see attached," but the actual attachment they can't read because you've encrypted that separately. So that's just a simple way of doing it. You can set up completely encrypted emails between you and another company end to end. But there's additional configuration that you have to do. But if you've got if you have a separate payroll company, for example, you would definitely do that because you would assume it's worth the extra bit of work to get that completely encrypted. Then you can send emails to them, or use the other option is use one of those file sharing services. So have a business Dropbox account or a business Google Drive account that's under your domain, and then that will be encrypted completely. So just the main thing is don't send the data just purely in email unencrypted.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and so as you were speaking to earlier, I mean, bank details, things of that nature, people should be very cautious transferring them by mail or over the telephone. Really be incredibly cautious about any sort of sensitive information that can be then used by people in an unscrupulous fashion.
Yeah.
David, you spoke earlier about this password manager, and I'm wondering, can you give a couple of? Are there any systems that you like best? Is there?
Yeah. There's a few out there. A couple of the leaders are probably one password, and another one called LastPass. They're quite slick, quite easy to use. The OSs have them built in as well. So Mac OS has Keychain, and then Windows, I forgot the name of the one for Windows, but it's again got another password manager built into it that you could use. I find I like using 1Password because it just keeps it separate. Particularly if I replace my computer, then all I do is restore my 1Password vault, and then I've got my passwords back. Because if I lost all my passwords, then I'd be in trouble.
Exactly. That's a concern for everyone, of course, and because you have to come up with a unique password for each application.
Yeah.
Every time you log into anything, you inevitably have so many passwords that you face this dilemma of how do I store these passwords effectively. And I know it's an area where people often fall down, and keep it in an unsecure format.
Yeah, that's definitely not. Yeah, definitely not a way to do it. Definitely don't try and think up your own passwords, and don't store them in a note or an Excel file or something.
Yeah.
So
because that will also invalidate your insurance and things like that. So it's worth
yeah. It's kind of heading towards that negligence thing.
Well, I know that it's a concern. It's a constant source for me as a private individual, but it's as businesses we should all be concerned about this as well, because it's it can be very, very disruptive when something like this, when there is some sort of something that does happen, and businesses are ultimately liable for these things. As we were discussing earlier, there are fines available for negligence, so it's something that businesses need to consider. It's not something that you can just sort of gloss over and say, well, we weren't prepared because we're growing. That's not an acceptable answer in the government's eyes.
Yeah,
so responsibility with people's data. You have a responsibility for it, and need to make sure you are dealing with it in a secure fashion.
Yeah, and some of those, when you lose money, you have to be careful that sometimes there's chances your insurance doesn't pay out, because if you just made the payment to a person, that's there are scenarios, there's cases where people haven't been reimbursed for that because they logged into their bank and just made the payment.
Yeah. So, no, exactly.
They weren't hacked.
Yeah, it's quite common, right? So unless they can get the funds back, the bank is going to be reluctant to to reimburse you those funds. There's another question follow-up from Annette saying one of her suppliers has asked for direct debit instructions to be emailed to them. Is this secure? And I know that's something that people have asked from me before. Please fill in the details.
So is this? So I guess it would be like a PDF or something, most likely, where you've kind of filled it out, scanned it in, or something. So you can encrypt the file again. Various different ways. So in Adobe Acrobat or other tools, you can encrypt the PDF because that's the sensitive bit. So encrypt it, send it to them, and then call them with the password. And then, it's slightly too high risk to just send and just take a chance.
That's great advice. And that's something that people do not do. I think a lot of times you just fill in the details, send them over the internet, and this is common practice. Of course, an incredibly high risk activity, and people aren't maybe aware of how high risk it is. So I think that's great advice, David. If people want to get in touch with Moof IT, how do they do that?
So you can catch us by email. We've got a website, obviously, as you'd hope. So we're moof-it.co.uk, so go on the website. If the company name is relatively unique, so if you Google us, we should be the only one. But so we've got www.moof-it.co.uk. You can email. I'll just type it in the box. You can email us there as well.
Perfect. And you said, it's an Apple-based service. So is it only Apple, or you also deal with PC?
No, we kind of do everything. We do Windows and Linux as well. So we're quite strong on that side. We're predominantly Apple, or our customers are predominantly Apple. It's kind of one of our slight strengths.
Yeah.
But we build big VMware, Windows Server infrastructure systems, networking, Cisco, and so on. So, yeah.
Wonderful. So anybody with any sort of system, Linux, Mac, or PC can reach out to Moof IT. We do have one follow-up question here from Annette, wondering, ballpark, how much should IT support cost a month?
Really open question. I'd say if related specific to Moof, then I'd say just drop us an email and we'll discuss it, because it's kind of bespoke. It's based on loads and loads of variables: how many people, how many computers, what systems you've got, what you're looking for help with, how heavy or light touch you might want the support. Yeah, and if you were to contact different companies, the price varies massively, because it also depends what the company provides. We tend to do a more all-encompassing service to take ownership of the customer. Other companies offer just a more reactive pay-as-you-go model, which we tried but doesn't really work for us. So it really varies. But yeah, drop us an email if you're interested.
Great. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, certainly outsourcing, your IT needs is something that people should consider. I mean, it's a cost. Having in-house support may not give you the breadth of knowledge that you need to be able to function effectively.
Yeah, I know. So I said at the start, we've got over 150 clients, so we kind of learn when something happens to one client, the other 149 clients benefit from that knowledge that we've gained centrally, and a whole list of other reasons to outsource. I mean, it's a common point of discussion: do it in-house or outsource. But yes, we obviously believe in outsourcing.
No, I think personally that makes a lot of sense, given that you do get that different, that breadth of knowledge and the collective knowledge from all the other clients as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, David, I think we are sort of getting close to the end of the questions and probably our session, but I would like to thank you for joining us this morning, for giving us your time. It's been a great session. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Cool. You're welcome. Thanks very much.
It's been very informative, and I hope that everyone has learned some stuff about this and will be more aware of it going forward, because it is something that people do need to consider and often is overlooked at the beginning of starting a business, and something that people do need to think about. So reach out to Moof IT if you have questions, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. I hope, David, you have a wonderful weekend.
Yep, you too. Yeah, thanks very much.
And take care, everyone.
Great. Thanks.